A reminder then of our question for today. How can I get to know the Bible? Well, in some ways, the most important thing we can do before we even think about that is to pray that God will help us to understand. We're going to be thinking more about prayer over the next few weeks, but for now, it's important for us to remember to ask God for his help to understand any time that we open up our Bibles. And that's something we can do on our own, or it's something that we can do with other people, like we would do in church. So how do we get to know the Bible? Well, first of all, read it. How many of you like reading? Is it fiction books or non-fiction books? Is it a mix of the two? I absolutely love reading and getting stuck into an adventure or finding out more about a particular topic. But if I have a book like this, I need to read it or I won't get to know the story. It's not enough just to read the bit on the back. That gives me some clues, but it doesn't tell me the whole thing. And if I only read maybe the first part, I'll get a good idea of how the story starts, but I won't get to find out how the story ends, and I won't understand it all. And it's like that with the Bible too. God has given us the Bible as one big book, which, as our song says, is all about Jesus. If we want to fully understand God, fully understand Jesus, and learn all those things that we've just said in the last video are so important, then we need to read the whole book. Now, we're not going to read it all at once. It's going to take us time to read through all the different bits. But over time, we can read all the different parts, and they will help us to understand God's big story. Because yes, the Bible is split into lots of little books with lots of different stories and different types of writing, but it is one big story that tells us all about God and God's plan for the world. So, first thing we can do is read it. Next thing we can do is read it again. Yes, you did hear me right. So, I've read this book before. It was probably about 5 years ago. Do you think I can remember everything that happens in it? No. I can remember some things, but I've forgotten a lot of the details. So if I want to remember what has happened, I'm going to need to read it again to remind myself. Do you ever remember every single thing that you read? Whether that's in a fiction book, in a non-fiction book, whether it's in something you've read at school, do you ever remember everything forever? Well, no. So it's the same with the Bible. God wrote his word and he wrote it down for us to remind us about all of his promises to us. He knows that we're not going to remember everything all of the time. So we should read it again and again to remind ourselves of all the promises that are in there. So we read it, then we read it again. But after that, there's other things too. We can listen to it being explained. Do you ever have questions about what you read in the Bible? I know I do. Sometimes it can be tricky to understand everything that the Bible says, and so we need help to understand it. Like we said at the start, we can pray for God to help us, but God also gives other people who can help us to understand the Bible. And that's why it's so important for us to come to church and listen to the Bible being explained by the minister or by our teachers in Sunday school. We can hear some of the big words explained, and then we can see some of the connections between the different parts of the Bible. The person explaining it can also help us to see why it's important in our lives and how we can share it with others. So we read it, then we read it again, we listen to it being explained, and then finally we think about what it says. The stories in the Bible can be stories with lots of drama and adventure. Think of Daniel and the lion's den. Think of David and Goliath. Think of Noah and the ark. Think of Jesus walking on the water. But we know that they're not just stories on their own. They are there to teach us more about God. So it's important that we think about each bit of the Bible and what it says in some detail. So we can ask ourselves some questions to help us to do this. Firstly, what does the passage tell us about God? Some stories in the Bible show us that God is powerful. Some show us that he loves us. Others show us that he never changes. There are so many things that we can learn about God as we read. Once we've done that, we can make connections. Have you read another part of the Bible which says something similar to what you're reading today? For example, the parting of the Red Sea and the calming of the storm both show that God has power over creation. Once we've seen what it tells us about God, once we've looked for any connections, do we have any questions? If we do have questions, write them down. Ask an adult at home if they maybe have an idea of the answer. Bring them along to Sunday school and ask us when you see us on a Sunday. So we can read it, then read it again, then we listen to it being explained, and then we think about what it says. So we've thought there about how we can get to know the Bible better, and I hope that that can be something that helps you every single day. So I'd like to set you a challenge for today and for the rest of the week, maybe even the rest of the month, the rest of the year. It's up to you. Have a look at the video below and find out what our challenge is for today.